Today, my name is Abby Warman. I'm the programs manager at TCEDC. And we also have Gabby over here, who's the outreach coordinator at TCEDC, and Patty, who's the communications director, who's filming today, and Floor. Floor, what's your role at TCEDC?
I am the grant evaluator.
Floor is a grant evaluator. Okay. So we're gonna get started. I know we're waiting for about a dozen more people to roll in, and I hope that they find it, but if they don't, then we're getting a nice little intimate panel experience, so that's awesome. Thank you all so much for coming today. We're really excited to have this lineup of panelists, and we're gonna be talking a little bit about what's going on at Shawn's ranch with Pat's cattle, who are being brought there as we speak. I think they're potentially in the process of being unloaded right now.
Could be a rodeo going on, whatever.
Yeah, there might be something going on. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what's going on with Shawn's land, but we're also just going to be talking about the expertise that all of these people are bringing to the panel from various walks of life and various backgrounds. So over here I have Patricia Quintana, who is a shepherdess in Taos. I have Kim Barmann, who is president of Soil Health Academy and owner of CS Ranch.
One of the owners.
One of the owners, yeah, with siblings and family. We have Shawn Howard, who is a land steward who owns the ranch where we'll be going and touring later today, where Pat's cattle will be hopefully grazing this afternoon. And Tobias Duncan, who's in San Cristobal and has helped to organize a collaborative grazing effort and is part of the San Cristobal Ditch Association. So I'm going to be passing around this microphone. We'll start with you, Shawn. You can just push the tab up to turn it on. I'm going to have you guys introduce you guys a little bit more in depth, just because that was a little brief introduction by me, but I think that it would be better if you guys did a little self-introduction to give us a little bit more context. So do you want to go ahead and start, Shawn?
Sure. Hello. Okay. What's up? Hello?
You can use this one.
Okay. My name is Shawn Howard, and like she said, I own this, it's about 300-acre ranch. It was, at one time, going to be a subdivision of 10-acre hobby farms. Through luck and perseverance, I guess, my family and I ended up with all the lots, and nothing was ever built. So I took it back to agricultural, so now it's all one piece. And so that was in 2014. I spent 2 years during the summers redoing all the old fencing and infrastructure, and this will be my 10th summer running cattle. Just for context, this was a part of a bigger ranch many years ago, but it has been basically neglected for so long that it turned into all dirt. So when we go out there, most of everything you see was dirt and prairie dogs. And so just using what we're going to talk about today, I use cattle. You can use all kinds of different animals, but through intensive grazing and then rest periods, bringing back the native grasses and forbs and whatnot. And so using electric fences and whatnot, but as Kim will talk about, they do the exact same thing basically, but on thousands and thousands of acres. So it's the same principle no matter how big an area you have. And I've seen just drastic improvements, especially in the last probably 4 to 5 years. So it takes a little while to get started. And then all of a sudden you have this exponential, life starts coming back to what we're trying to get. I guess the one thing before I get into it is I use cattle, but cattle is just the tool that I use. That's one of the big things I want to get. You can use chickens, you can use pigs, you can use all kinds of different things. Cattle is the easiest for me to use for numerous reasons. But the cattle is just a tool, just like you use a pencil or a piece of paper. that's what I really want people to understand here. It's just a tool to bring life back to the soil. So, yeah, and then when we get out there, just ask me questions and I'll, but the moving of the fences and the things that I use, those are the easy things. It's how do you think about what you're trying to accomplish on your land, whether it's a garden or hundreds of thousands of acres like Kim has. Like, where are you trying to go? So.
Awesome, thank you. Do you want to pass it to Tobias?
I'm Tobias Duncan. I've been a parciante my whole life in the San Cristobal watershed. And at some point during the pandemic, I kind of got kicked out of Mexico where I was hanging out. And I started refurbishing my family property in San Cristobal. And I noticed that just a lot of what had been an agricultural community in my youth had pretty much become just a bunch of fallow fields. So I was able to kind of leverage the Healthy Soil Grant that the NMDA puts out to start bringing back fallow fields. And so far we've done about 80 acres on 35 different landowners' properties. We've brought back from being sagebrush and various stages of just dirt and prairie dog and fallow to varying levels of being back in some kind of grazable production. So yeah, I definitely get the small scale end of things, right? And I totally agree with Shawn that the cows are a tool, whatever animals that you can get your hands on. Ideally in San Cristobal at some point we're going to try and put what's called a flurd together, which will be both sheep and cattle and maybe even goats and pigs all living in sin, being rotated around the valley. Anyway, so that's most of my story.
Well, I'm Kim Davis Barmann, one of my siblings and I now, and with our children are running the CS Ranch. We have mountain country actually that's just right up here behind us, and also the flats. We have the headquarters in our Crow Creek area, and we compiled about 130,000 acres. And I have actually been an advocate of now regenerative ags, the big way to call it, since 1984. My mentor and longtime follower since I was teeny was Alice Moore, and I have this visual of the day in 1983 where I was helping her put out mineral into cows, and we drove up on a part of her ranch, and she said, I want to take you to show you this pasture. She said, we used to call it the rock pile. And I said, oh, okay. So we topped this hill, and literally the fence line contrast was just amazing of seeing, 4, 6, 8-inch tall grass with western wheat, which we had not seen much of in our area because of it probably being grubbed out in the spring. And she said, you need to go to a holistic management Allen Savory school. And it changed my life. I became, a groupie of holistic management, Ray Hunt and Tom Dorrance with the Horse Advocate, huge friends with Bud Williams for the livestock management, and have pretty much done it for the last 42 years. And I can say I think there's a big movement coming on now, and I'm glad to see that because people are realizing that we have got to be taking better care of our soil because it affects our small communities, it affects our farmers and ranchers, because the big ag movement has really been a hardship on these communities. And I would say that what we started out doing was we had a great holistic management consultant by the name of Ken Williams, who actually left. He was working for the NRCS, and he so believed in it that he became a consultant in the mid-'80s. And we went on to just split big pastures. And what made us, within about 6 years, we developed water, which is a big expense, but water's critical, to get your movement of places. We started splitting big herds, or combining our cattle herds, which was huge, instead of leaving a bunch of little herds. It's nobody's fault, not any past managers. We just learned that if we can do the critical rest was a game changer, and also not be leaving overgrazing or undergrazing too long. And we have areas that just exploded within 5 or 6 years, and which was of course along the creek, seeing willows come back and things like that. So I've been blessed to be on this journey. It was something that was so important to me that I've always advocated within not only statewide, because I think New Mexico, unfortunately, is one of the most desertified states in the nation, just because of our climate and of how we can get native, warm perennials back. An example in areas that we have been able to do with, as Shawn pointed out, these electric fences are amazing. We put in permanent ones as well as use electric fencing. But I've gone from where we used to have 6 to 8 species of grasses. I have over 50 now along. This is just, and not the whole ranch, because areas where we've not been able to develop water, you'll still see, oh gosh, there's only the poor blue grama out there with the little western wheat, squirrel tail coming on from spring. But so that's what's so important to me, is just observation of what you can see and how exciting it can be by doing that. And I could go on and on, I get on the chatterbox, but have the next generation quite interested. Ben and John are doing a lot up in the mountains, so boy, if you can do it in these mountains where you have the elk population, we have a lot of elk in our part of the world, down in the flats too, that I think it can be done anywhere from any kind of species to actually any small or big lands. And so.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Is this on? I can't hear myself. Anyways, good morning. I'm Patricia Quintana. I am from Taos. I have a small Navajo Chudo sheep operation, and I also raise cashmere goats, mainly for fiber. But technically, I'm a sheep and wool reproductive physiologist by training, but by profession, I was a lobbyist for 35 years, focusing on grazing issues, agriculture, water, and higher education issues. I always tell people sheep got me into my career, took me worldwide, and allowed me to come back home full circle. Now, having come back home full circle to a small farm that we had left, because we also had ranches between Taos and Angel Fire, but what I came back to is 25 acres of property that was pretty much desertified. Dirt, prairie dogs. And I remember buying this tractor, and I decided to plow one field, and I thought, oh, hell, I'm gonna do the whole thing. And at one point, it was just a wonderful thing when you start turning that soil over. And this is all related to healthy soils. It's like, the earth is a mother. She was like breathing for the first time. It was a beautiful color. And then you add that seed, and then you start working that water, because it hadn't been irrigated for a long time, and you really have to understand the art of moving water on a small operation. One point I stood in the middle there and cried, thinking, what the hell was I thinking? It's humbling, especially when you grow up on a property that was very vibrant. But in these, the 25 acres, starting from scratch, and we've talked about cattle. I think multi-species grazing is really a good way of looking at things too, because every species will deal with certain kind of noxious weeds and allow those grasses to come back. And if you put them on at the right time, it really makes a big difference. So it turns up the soil, it does a multitude of good things. For me, I had to fence off with electric fencing, with mesh fencing, all these different paddocks when I started getting it in operation. I had to re-engineer ditches for acequias to make things work a lot smoother for me, and I could irrigate at night. I'm in an area that's becoming super gentrified, and I have neighbors who, just won't they don't take care of the land or value what they have. So it's putting a lot of pressure on me to deal with that. So I raised Navajo Churro sheep. I got into that for several reasons. One, it's a threatened and heritage breed. Two, I wanted to be able to conserve that breed and the fiber for artists, and then mainly for fiber, and a lot of the breeding stock. So I did a lot of genetic selection and breeding for that went all over the country. And then cashmere goats, mostly for fiber, and the animals that did not have the genetics, I'd move that on as for meat. But what I finally had to do, traditionally there's alfalfa all over my area, and that takes up a lot of water. So I really had to do a lot of researching and searching for a combination of grasses and forbs and legumes that were semi-drought resistant and that would be ideal for small ruminants. So I went with a combination that had 4 different grasses, cool season, warm season, some forbs and some legumes. And the legumes were basically natural internal parasite control for small ruminants. So it's taken me about 20 years to reestablish the whole thing, little by little, gradually, one piece at a time. But using both goats and sheep has been really critical because, you know, sheep eat one thing, goats eat another. I put them out first thing in the spring when things are coming up. I put them back out in the fall when other, you know, weeds and things are coming up. So it works really well, but it's been a long haul. It's been a challenge. But going back to what our panelists before me just said, healthy soils. And what Kim said, it starts with a healthy soil. And we live in a separatist society where we separate everything. But it starts with soil, healthy. So it depends on the vegetation that you're putting in. You know, you could rotate. I rotate a lot, and when I grew up on that farm, my grandfather used to have barley, rotate with wheat, rotate with oats, rotate with, I forget what the other one was, I think not amaranth, but quinoa. And all of those rotation, as he put it back into the soil, started developing, you know, healthy soil and put nutrients back. So I try to do that in the fall. I don't harvest anything, I just rotate, except for one pasture that's harvested. But you have to take care of the soil, because if you don't, it doesn't take the seed. And if you don't have the water, or looking at the water, you need that water for the soil and the seed. And then you need the human component that oversees that. And we don't look at any of this in general nowadays as a system. Mm-hmm. It's a system, not only a system of the ecological system, but it's also a system of the humans who take care of that, and it's also a system of community. And we're getting away from that a lot. But for me, it's been a really wonderful experience, a hard one. I'm downsizing now, just because for me, the pressures of gentrification and, you know, suburbia moving into my area, that's really what's probably gonna, in the next few years, make me want to just be done. And with that, I'll just turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you for that. And thanks so much for everyone here for all the work that you guys have been doing for decades in agriculture and policy and lobbying and collaborative work. So thanks for sharing that, guys. Shawn, I'm going to start with you. So when we spoke before this panel, you mentioned that ideally you'd like to worry less about precipitation and irrigation and more about your land's capacity to absorb the moisture that hits it. Can you speak a little bit about how you've turned your land from a place with little biomass, from this dirt lot, as you were saying, and low infiltration to somewhere that can act as a sponge?
Yeah. I'll start with, how did I, so I use the cattle, and I use the electric fences, and the cattle with their hooves are going to break the compaction. There's always going to be a seed bed there. One of the things that when I say I don't want to worry about the sky, because hope and pray is not a business plan. So I think about how do I just accept any water that I do get? And so how do I create my own rain? How do I create my own dew? And so all I care about is plants, because plants have roots. So we're going to, and I hate the word weed, because that's only a human context. If you ask any other species on the planet, they wouldn't call it a weed. So I have a really hard time with that. I understand why we do it, but I don't agree with it. It's a context that you're told when you're young. And so all I care about is leaves out there doing photosynthesis. Because I know what's going to happen. You'll go from bacterial driven to fungal driven, which will bring the grasses and the things that we think are visually what we want to see. But if you start and step back and say, because people say, well, that's a thistle, and that my cows eat thistle, so why would I want to get rid of thistle? Okay, and so they have a really big root system. And they also grow when you have, bare dirt. So I don't see them as a problem. It'll change over time. But the whole idea of weed is just a human context. And I understand where it comes from, but it's a reductionist thought in my mind. However you want to think about it, it's fine. All I'm asking you is to open your mind to think about the plants, because they all do the exact same thing. They all photosynthesize. If you're a child, if nobody tells you that that's a weed, you just think it's a pretty flower. But then over here, well, this sunflower or this rose, oh, this is a beautiful flower. But they'll tell you that that's a weed because it's a thistle. But they're the same thing. So that's one of the things I want to get across today in my mind. How you take it, that's up to you. So I think about how do I capture all the water when I get it? Because all I hear about is, well, I got to have irrigation, I got to have this, I got to have that. All I care about is plant coverage on the ground. And when I get water, it'll soak in. And then things will change over time. But worrying about irrigation, what the rainfall percentage was, none of that matters to me. I just have to adapt to whatever I get. Blaming the sky is just a futile thing, I guess. Yeah. All I want is plants, and I want leaves, and I want litter on the ground. So when the water comes down from the sky, because it comes down at 25 miles an hour, and if it's bare dirt, it's erosion. If you look at it really, really closely. So I don't care what kind of plant, they'll change over time. And so that's my philosophy. Like Taos, I hear all the time, well, we need more, we're fighting over irrigation water and this and that. I'm saying, let's just create more water instead of fighting over and over how much, comes out of the ski valley into our ditches and stuff. Let's just create more water by taking the desertified land and using these principles that we're talking about to create more plants, which means you're going to nucleate more moisture in the air. And so I don't like to fight about the water or argue about it. Let's just create more water. And so that's kind of where I'm at, if I explain it.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, awesome, thank you. Yeah, and another thing that I think about a lot with weeds and would like to learn more about myself is that their information, their information about the growing conditions.
Yeah, I
and
guess
so
I didn't say that. They're just
Yeah.
telling me what my land is doing at this time.
Yeah.
So they're just a informational tool that I look at. Yeah, I can tell you that's more bacterial driven, that's more fungal driven. That grass is a lower species, or lower, not species grass, but then you have higher grasses, and then you get the, shrubs and then forest. But yeah, I just open your mind to instead of thinking through human-centric, think of everything, all species. From the when we say that's a weed, but it's not a weed, it's just another plant that photosynthesizes.
It's a four-border lagoon.
Well, whatever it is, I mean, it doesn't matter. It has a leaf, and it's doing something. It's creating sugars, and it's feeding the microbes. And so you're always going to end up having the weeds start out because you'll have bacterial-driven soils. Then you go to fungal-driven soils as you get higher up the plant species. You get to forest, and it's very, very fungal, right? And so, just be very open-minded to what you think you know about plants. And everything we think about is, to me, is we always think about it from our point of view, not nature's point of view.
Right, yeah, tying into the full systems thinking that Patricia was talking about. Kim, could you were telling me about how you were extending your critical rest periods longer than you had originally learned and thought about because you're adapting to this climate that we live in that has a lot of drought. And could you speak a little bit to that learning curve and how you pivot your practices accordingly as you continue to learn and adapt to a changing landscape?
Well, as I said, we started just splitting pastures, putting big herds of yearlings together in the mid-'80s, like 1987 or so. And within 5 or 6 years, I saw this real steep climb from, 5 or 6 species of grasses that jumped to about 12. And then we plateaued for about 5 years. And I had a buddy down, Roger Bowe down in, who I'd go and see down in the southern part of the state, and he was seeing a lot more grasses. He had real sandy soil compared to ours. But he had started experimenting with staying out longer than the 120-day rest period, which was kind of taught in the holistic management. And I was grazing some, that's what we call our beeves, is fats. I only had about 10 of them, and we were moving them in a field that I was trying to rehabilitate. And there was one section that I happened to just leave for almost a year, and it was amazing the different grasses that I started seeing, just the natives. There was some big blue. If you see little big blue coming up, you're rocking it, especially on these up on the hillsides now that we see a lot of it. So that triggered me to say, especially in our rangeland area, not on where your alkali bottoms of alkali saccatone, we will hit them twice a year, but if it depends if it's really bad drought, we will not. But that's where I have, within the last 8 years, able to use more intense herding effect of, like as the bison, big herds, and getting your dung drop, the saliva, the urine, etc. That was a game changer for me. So we had some pastures that were so drought out a couple years ago that we gave them 2 years rest, and it's amazing how you now have, I call it runt blue grandma, which probably isn't even a term, but you'll now see the stems are getting wider, and that is great. But I do want to make one comment that Ray Archuleta, my friend, always says this, and an incredible teacher. You all need to watch any of his videos or watch Kiss the Ground that he's in. But he always says that Mother Nature is self-healing and self-regulating. So if you can just be patient and observe, if you're going one direction, as Shawn said, I don't worry about anything what I think, is that bad, because we had a big field full of thistle, and this year there's absolutely no thistle in that field because we had the worms come in that took after it. You have worms that'll take care of broom, snakeweed, and so that's.
Yeah, thank you. So talking about observation, and again, this whole systems thinking, and how does this one part tie into these other parts. And it does take a long time to see how that all comes together. Patricia, could you explain how you've woven this systems thinking into your operation over the years, from the way that you manage your land and your animals to the way that you've worked to bring local meat to consumers?
Sure. It's all a system, and I'm going to go back to saying it's a system. We can't do one thing without the other. It's about observation, like we've all talked about. there was a time I had a successful land business. I had 4 key restaurants in Santa Fe. I had 3 restaurants in Albuquerque. I had 3 in Taos, and at the time, this was in the 80s, it was La Montanita, Food Co-op, and Sid's, plus about 60 home customers. Now, to get the quality that I needed, I really had to go back to what is on the ground. And, we're talking about water, I'm on this watershed that comes off of this watershed here, and once that water's done, it's done. But when I re-engineered everything, and I could irrigate at night, in the fall, if there's still some vegetation, because like right now with all this heat, because I have cool season grasses, they look like they're dried up. But with this little rain, they're starting to come back. But when I have grasses that are about this tall in the fall, what I do is I just mulch it back in. And in some of those areas that are a little bare, I throw seed down, and all the manure that I have in my sheep pens or my goat pens, I run it on top of that. I spread it over that. So, and then in areas I will switch barley with oats, with wheat. Sometimes I do peas, because all of those add nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesium, calcium, etc., back into the soil. In the spring, I'll run sheep through there, and then whatever's there, I mulch it back in. So I keep building that soil as a system. Again, it's a system. And I have to observe, again, it's Mother Nature, we just have to move with her, we can't control her. It's like Kim said, you've got this weed, there's other animals out there that take care of things, you just have to be patient. We live in a society that's not patient. We want it done now, we want the green now, blah, blah. But as you do this and your soils are healthy, your vegetation is healthy, whatever animals you are grazing on there are going to be healthy. So when you take them to market, and at the time I was marketing on a much larger scale, I had to become very, very intimate with not just the system on the farm that was producing my end product, but as I drove my sheep to market or to a slaughter plant, I'd always be on the kill floor because I wanted to see what's going on. Is there a liver fluke? Is there this? Is there that? What do I need to do to adjust my management plan, which goes back to soil? When we'd hang it, I'd have to take a look at the carcass. Meat to bone ratio, meat to fat ratios, all of those things that were going to affect my end product as I was sending it to market, whether it was a high-end restaurant in Santa Fe, whether it was a food cooperative, or whether it was a home customer. I needed to know what was going on there. And at one point, I was also part of a cooperative in Los Ojos, so I was working also by pulling producers. And I had to work with those producers back to the soil, what's going on, the breeding, the genetics, the health, the nutrition. I had a little scale I take around. It was a sliding scale. So I needed lambs to weigh so much. So if they met that, they'd get a percentage. If it was less, I paid less. But I finally got this small group of producers eventually to change their management, going back to the soil, to produce that end product that high-end restaurants wanted, that my home customers wanted. And so it's a system. And, we live in an area right now where there's a huge demand for where your meat comes from, where your vegetables come from. And I think we're in a really unique position. It's like Kim said earlier, you have large corporate farms and ranches that are taking over communities that really are putting a lot of people out of business. The agricultural industry in this country is made up of 1.2% of us that produce food and fiber for the masses. Yet, we're probably one of the group of individuals agriculturalists. They're the least respected around because, you know, we have urban and rural. Most people in the urban suburban area don't really care about where their food comes from. But the thing is, we are an agrarian culture. We're a culture of individuals who produce. And we break that down. And I don't care where in the world you go, and I've been all over the world working with different operations, we're all the same. We worry about the same things. We're spiritual by nature because anytime you work with the soil or land, you're spiritual. Doesn't mean you're religious, you're spiritual. That's a whole different thing. So it all stems from that. And in the years I've worked locally and around the world, it stems from that healthy soil. Whether it's vegetables or whether it's beef or lamb or pigs or whatever you're doing. We have to look at it as a system again. And it's everything that everybody has said so far. It's, you know, I don't worry so much about water. I love it and I take advantage of it when I have it. But because I keep, you know, mulching and putting things back in and growing different things that add different nutrients, it stays longer. But because I have a combination of grasses, like I said earlier, like right now, some of them look like they're dead, but they're not. They're just cool season grasses. So you just have to work with that. It's just a system. But in the years of marketing land and even the fiber, because my fiber goes to very special weavings, celebrity weavings, museum pieces. My fiber goes all over the world, Spain, places like that. The quality of my fiber also has to do with the nutrition and the timing of things. It's timing, it's a system, it's understanding, like, you know, we've been talking about, understanding the nuances and the subtleties. You have to pay attention.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and that takes so much time. It takes a lot of time to observe and pay attention and note all these things that are happening in the larger system. Tobias, in San Cristobal, you and your neighbors organized a collaborative grazing effort with support from Owen Hublutzel, who will be facilitating the workshops tomorrow at Shawn's Ranch. And what were I have two questions. One is, what were the intentions and outcomes of that grazing effort? And the next one is, what would you recommend to other people who are other groups of people who are looking to work together with a mix of resources and land and livestock to regenerate land in their community?
Yeah, so there are a lot of challenges, you know. In our little watershed, which was all, it was all subsistence farming 100 years ago, and even 60 years ago. And then it started to fade out. And Patricia was just talking about lamenting the gentrification. And here's the big problem with the gentrification is when you have new people that move in to your kind of closed system, they're not coming in with the same values as the people who have been there and have been working the land for all this time. And a lot of those people, you know, we had a diaspora out of San Cristobal and out of Taos County that happened, you know, in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Everybody kind of migrated up the Rio Grande Valley and they ended up in the I-25. They ended up in Denver and Cheyenne and all these other places. And they kind of left, and the people that kind of moved in, like my family moved in the 60s, but they had this kind of this back to the lander idea. So we definitely were into working the land and stuff like that, but the people that kind of came after us, they were here for the views, they were here for the skiing, they were here for all kinds of different reasons that had nothing to do with agriculture at all. And that happened and kept happening and happening and happening. The land gets diced up a little bit, people aren't maintaining, you know, they're not irrigating their property, they're not maintaining the acequias that go through their property. You know, they're working and having careers and all this kind of stuff. And that's a big problem that just starts deteriorating the land. And when you start with something that was already overgrazed and we already had problems with sagebrush from management that wasn't ideal before, the gentrification just adds another layer of problems. So what we have kind of been doing at San Cristobal is we tried to reach out to these people, and with varying levels of success, and bring them back into the fold. You have water rights, you have this amazing piece of land. Why don't you learn a little bit about this stuff? And even if you don't want to work your land, maybe your neighbor will work your land in exchange for being able to graze it. And so at some point, I'm glad you mentioned Ray Archuleta, because at some point we managed to get Ray Archuleta to come to San Cristobal. And there was it was early in the pandemic and people really got excited. Ray's like a preacher. He can get you excited and he's an optimist and things just kind of happen. So I was able to leverage his talk into a bit of an excitement. And we had a bunch of people that came to that first one, but the word spread. People would talk about it at the post office and this and that. Oh, Ray Archuleta, and you should see Kiss the Ground and all this kind of stuff. We ended up with this snowball effect, and then I brought him back a year later, and now we had a proper group of people. A lot of the Parciantes were there to see Ray Archuleta, and everybody drank the Kool-Aid. So now, you know, that makes my job so much easier. And instead of, like when I first started, you know, hawking this free seed that came from the government, I was having to twist people's arm to say, hey, let me just bring a tractor and some seed, and I just wanted to mow and plant some seed. People were suspicious of that at first, and I had to knock on doors, and it was really, after 2 rounds of Ray Archuleta, everybody was coming to me. I didn't have to do that work anymore, you know. So I hope that answered at least part of your
Yeah, yes, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, and just this talk about gentrification and how to loop people into retaining the land that we have and making sure that that doesn't go away and is damaged irreparably reminds me of when we were talking and you were mentioning that you feel really passionately about ranching, tying ranching into supporting local rural America and getting people back onto the land. And I know that you and your sister have done some work in that with the mercantile that you opened. Would you be down to talk a little bit about that?
Ooh, yes. Well, the mercantile, actually, it all came with the love of the building. It's in Old Cimarron that is located in Old Town Cimarron, about 4 miles from Philmont. And it was a little hardware store. They had sundries, they sold everything. And it came up for sale in the 80s, or the late 80s, when I was actually just starting a grass-fed beef thing, and I presented it to my brothers. We can do our hunting out of there, and they just thought I was crazy. So my girls were in 4-H, rodeoing, everything. It was probably a big disaster. But in 2017, it came up for sale again, and I told my sister and mom that this is our calling, that we've got to help I didn't want this building to be dozed down, so we got it on the historic registry. And it's been going since going into our 5th year. And it's pretty quiet during the winter, I will have to admit, but then when Philmont's in full explosion, we do enough to carry it to the next year. But my thing was where we have a freezer full of grass-fed beef and just trying to educate people. I mean, we're not probably near as versed as Taos is on trying to do local, and we'd love to start having little farmers markets, but that hasn't happened yet because I'm kind of busy moving cattle and helping with grandchildren. But I think, and I think people don't realize this. If you all can just remember this, look on the National Farmers Union page, and what farmers and ranchers get of percentage of their product is insanely low, sadly. The farmers in the 70s and 80s used to get 75, 80 cents on the dollar. Now it's between 8 cents and 12 cents, depends on what it is. They do it, and this is all USDA. I mean, so how can we keep these generations of family farms going? It's really tough. And what I'm doing, I'm president of the Soil Health Academy. I encourage you all to look at our website. We were doing schools, we've done tours around the state. We did not have one here this year, but just getting anybody to be educated on the importance of soil. If you're one of my board members says, if you're alive, you should be concerned about soil, and that's absolutely true. And so I get back, like I say, I'm just advocate. My family has always been big supporters of the small community, especially of Cimarron, our whole Colfax County area, and I think it's critical. And I just keep trying to encourage people to see where your animal's coming from. Well, I'll leave this one the last little bit. Another interesting fact, feedlots have become massive since the 70s. Our area became, for yearlings, 75 to 78% of the beef that was sold in New Mexico in the 70s and 80s was from New Mexico ranches. Now it's flip-flopped. It's only about 10% because we send them all away to Texas or Colorado or Oklahoma, and I want to get them all back, pooping on the land, doing grass-fed beef, and the microorganisms in the ground, all that bare ground will cover and heal, and we can make the underground population very happy, the biological life.
Yeah, thank you. We need more people on the ground for sure. Patricia, what went through your work with sheep is an extensive background involving empowering women and livestock and linking agriculture and economic development, similar to what Kim was just mentioning. What are some successful strategies that you've engaged in to lift up farmers and ranchers doing regenerative work? And how can Taos learn from these strategies in surrounding areas?
Well, I mean, I may have already answered this. It really goes back to, and it's all dependent on your region. You know, the ecological zone here is different than it is over the mountain in Taos versus Cimarron. So you really have to take a look at where you're at, and you really have to understand, again, the soils. I mean, it's like I chose not to go alfalfa except for one field, just because, one, I couldn't find anybody to come and harvest when the alfalfa is at its optimum nutritional level. I don't want a bunch of stem. And two, I mean, I'm not going to go out and buy a bunch of machinery. I mean, I do have a tractor that does things, so that's why I chose to go the route that I did. Now, in my travels all over the world, Middle East, former Soviet Union, South America, highlands in South America, everything is very different. And I would say, I don't know what I did to make things better, but it is going back to understanding your ecological zone and area and your soils. From using alpacas, vicuñas, to fat-tailed sheep, to zebu cattle in Africa and places like that. There's a lot of areas in Africa where they use cattle to restore areas. And Africa is a very, very desertified country. It varies, but it's pretty desert. Versus Peru or Bolivia, where you have a lot of alpaca and vicuña, and they use those a lot for the grazing issues. So it's all very specific. Most of the groups that I worked with were women-driven, women's cooperatives. The men, the men were there doing a lot of the work, but the women were the ones that were really looking at how do we improve our product, how do we improve the livestock. And when I would sit with women in a lot of these cooperatives, I'd always ask the women, why did you join this cooperative? And the women would say, for the future of our children. And they were going to do whatever it would take to make sure that the future of their children and their grandkids would have a good food supply and source to be able to keep moving. That was very telling for me and really sat with me. I didn't care what part of the world I was in, but in different languages, in different situations, that was what they'd say, for the future of our children. And so I would say that even in those situations, because as Americans and Europeans, if we go to a third world country, we like to pontificate. We like to tell them what they need to do, and this is where you are, rather than sit back. And I will say that in many situations, they'd have flip charts, which I was never good at anyways. And I'd be like, why do you have a flip chart? He says, well, everybody that comes here from America or Europe, this is what they use and how they tell us what to do. And I'm like, well, I don't even know how to flip it, and I have terrible writing. So what I would do is I'd sit him around in a table, I don't care what part of the world, and I'd go from one woman to the other and say, why are you part of this? Give me a little background. So by the time we'd be done, let's say if I was doing the A through Z's of marketing or business management, by the time we went around the table, they were all doing it. So then we'd organize them in the sense that, okay, you're great at marketing, you're great at whatever their skill set was, at money, at numbers. So by the time we were done, we had a whole system set up, and all they really needed was the vocabulary to go what they already knew that they were doing. And so they already understood the land, they just needed a little bit more help to push them over to make it better. So I guess, I don't know if that answers, but in any situation, I think somebody mentioned a minute ago, you were talking about community, getting people engaged. You don't go in there and start telling people what to do. You sit back, you observe. What is the strategy? You have your leaders, then you have the followers, and then you have the skeptics and the communities. Your leaders are always going to be those that are educated, that have more means, that are always going to do things. Your followers are those that like, yeah, I'm going to do this and we'll do that. And then the skeptics are going to sit back and say, yeah, what is this about? But eventually they come around because they're seeing the successes of those in the community. Same thing. Any group you go into, whether it's here, Pecos, Lindreth, wherever in the world or wherever in the state you go to, you always have to step back and take a look at community and get to know who's who in order to start implementing this. And this is the same concept I use worldwide as I use still locally.
Thank you. And it's interesting how those are a lot of the same concepts that we're using for the land, which is like sitting back, taking a lot of time observing, and then, as you were saying, it's self-regulating.
And it's, again, it's a system. Humans are part of that system. We're not better or worse. We're just part of that system. Because in the end, when we die, we go right back into the earth anyways. So we're part of the whole thing. So it's a cycle.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you all so much. I feel like you all really answered a lot of these questions that I had for you individually. I'm going to go ahead and ask everyone a closing question, and I hope you all could just pass the mic around and answer as you will. I guess it's two closing questions. It's one, what do you feel the general public needs to understand about farming and ranching in northern New Mexico? And two, how can people who are not actively involved in ranching support their local farmers and land?
I'm going to address that. I mentioned it earlier. I think there's a perception of rural and agricultural people not being super smart. There's just all this perception. And I'd like people to know that whatever your production situation is, whether it's crops, whether it's livestock, agrarian people are probably one of the most intelligent people in the world that I've ever been around. We have to be soil scientists, water engineers, agronomists, architects, geneticists, plant scientists, merchandisers, business people. I mean, we have to know a lot about a lot of things. So we research a lot and we're really well read. The other thing I think for people to understand, especially in northern New Mexico, is a lot of us, this is a chosen lifestyle, it's an inherited lifestyle, it's a cultural way of life, it's a chosen way of life, and it is not for the faint-hearted. And the other thing when it comes to livestock don't on their own overgraze. It's the managers that overgraze. So this whole thing that you read about, that you see that, oh, sheep and cattle, God, they just rape and pillage the environment, they don't do that on their own. It's like your bank, and you can't blame the bank if you're overdrawn. You're the manager of your money. It's the same thing. So that's what I would say, is that, don't take us for granted. There's a lot more to us than people, have a perception. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll kind of go up from a little different route of saying that I believe ranchers and farmers, because they've been so tough and have so many traditions, that I encourage breaking out of tradition and learning. I mean, education has been profound for me. I started going to holistic management, then ranching for profits, and just always learning what can be done. And I think that you're absolutely right, that if there's you see a major glaring problem, I can say on this land that my dad bought back in the 80s that I took over of, 2 of these pastures were just full of broom snakeweed or broomweed. And I started questioning that, and come to find out 4 years into the process of doing holistic management with Ken, we started digging. We're always using the shovel too to check your infiltration rates, etc. But had noticed during the 70s, this range caterpillar had become quite a problem out in the flats over the mountain near Cimarron and east, and lots of spraying was done. And what happened with that is, we, of course, they killed a lot of the range caterpillars, but in the meantime, there was probably 80 other wonderful, beneficial bugs that were being affected. And so about 4 years after my dad stopped spraying some of these hot areas, is what we call them, we started finding these little broom snakeweed bugs and we have no broom snakeweed in that, and that's a management issue. Big prairie dog towns, I hate to say this to people, but it's management. They do not like tall grass, and we still have some prairie dogs, but we try to mitigate managing those. My brothers have on some areas had decided to, poison them, and then I said, but boy, change the management, because that's the big thing. And I go back to also saying what I just repeated, is that ranching, I think we ranchers and farmers, in order to keep in next generations, we've got to change with what we know that we're learning about soil health, else we won't be here for the next several generations and beyond. That how I hope our family's able to survive, and so many other farmer and rancher in these isolated communities, that I would say. And I hope that we can get a big movement going with Soil Health Academy. We're starting to bring in workshops for the people health conscious, as well as individuals that just want to learn about soil. They're not ranchers or farmers, to educate them of how important it is to keep these farmers and ranchers on the land and not let it go to big ag.
Without getting philosophical, because I do a lot of thinking philosophically, I agree with obviously everything here. I guess I would say is, even if you're not doing anything in ag, just support the people that are trying to, and think about root causes of anything that you hear. Most people we think about symptoms, and then we go and we attack a symptom, but we never stand back and go, well, what's the root cause of this? Whether it's agriculture or health or anything else, we're always just going, well, we'll techno our way out of this. And so I would just say that if anything from my point of view is to read a lot, because everything I've learned, I've just read. And it's all free. All you gotta do is buy the book and read and read and read. and become a critical thinker, because we don't critically think anymore. I don't see it. We just go with whatever somebody's told us instead of step back and critically think, oh, I don't know if I agree with that. And so support your local ranchers. Think about evolution of how we got here. We've talked about sagebrush. And people say, well, this is an invasive species. And I say, well, give me a time frame. 10 million years, 100 million years ago, what was here? So it's all how you take perspective. I could say corn is an invasive species because it was brought here. It's a tropical grass.
In 500 feet.
Right?
on the valley
And
road.
so it's how you look at something and how you want to perceive what you're being told. So just critically think, read, don't just go with whatever somebody tells you. And I really love when she said that, overgrazing has never happened by a cow or a sheep or anything. It's always management. Always. The cow is just trying to live from one bite to the next. Whether you eat meat or not, we need animals on the land because that's how all these grasslands and everything developed 50 million years ago. So, and then plants. It starts with moisture in the soil, and the more plants you have, the more moisture you'll have, and then things will go towards whatever context that you want to see. So, yeah, I don't have any specifics of, how do we get, meat production or whatever it is. I just want people to think, critically think.
So what I think is that we need to do is we have to start having conversations with our neighbors, right? If you're in agriculture and you've got some stuff going on your property, let's say you're a producer and you've got neighbors who are in their own bubble, right? They work all day, maybe they are digital nomads, maybe they're telecommuting, maybe they have a job somewhere. Invite them over for dinner and kind of get them on the same page as you are, And if you're not in agriculture at all, and especially if you eat meat, think about meat in terms of, let's say, beef. Eating meat is really part of what's going to solve a lot of the problems that we're in. We need animal impact all over this county. We're really short on it. We have some cattle, we need more, believe it or not, and we need more sheep and we need more stuff. So we need to create the demand, and the demand's going to come from the people. So if you're at the supermarket and you're buying beef, remember that where it comes from, you're either helping to heal someplace. If you're doing the right thing and you're buying grass-fed beef, you're healing the land somewhere by engaging in that. If you're buying corn-finished beef that came from a feedlot, you're helping to diminish some land somewhere else. But the big thing to do is think, well, where am I most concerned about the land? And it should be the land that's closest to you that's being grazed. So try and buy meat from your neighbor, and you can seek these people out. You guys have a list of local producers that produce delicious lamb, delicious beef. The easiest beef that you can get your hands on is just go over to Sid's and get some local beef from Pat Pacheco. If you're, let's say, you're used to corn-fed beef and you're not really into the chewier beef and you like something that's fattier, get, Pacheco Farms beef. He finishes that out on pumpkins and beets and all kinds of crazy stuff. You're still not supporting a corn-fed feedlot, and you're getting beef that is really easy to appreciate. Maybe you're going to develop your palate a little more and start appreciating some of the other flavors that come from grass-fed beef that's exclusively grass-finished. And then the other thing is just do your best to help educate the people around you. Earlier you asked about Owen and him coming out to San Cristobal with HMI. That's a big deal, and they want to come into your community and they want to help. So if you reach out to HMI and set something up, they are more than willing to help you, and you just have to do the legwork of getting your neighbors to a community center or something like this, and, you know, he'll get them on board. You know, it can happen.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. On the note of that information about the local beef and lamb, we do have a flyer on the table back here. Patty's gonna move around. So take a flyer. It has contact information with different meat products and producers in the Taos area and neighboring areas. And yeah, not only take a flyer, but take a photo and share it with your friends and your family and post it on your Instagram or your Snapchat. Yeah, thank you all so much. That was really beautiful. I feel like you all tied together really well. Do we have any questions from the crowd? I recently heard that sometimes when you ask that, then you have to stare at people for a little bit.
We kind of snuck up on you with that one.
We did. Well,
I want to say I appreciate you all coming. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just
thanks.
huge.
I realized it was tricky to get here.
Really, really appreciate it.
We appreciate you guys
Yeah.
doing.
yeah, thank you all so much for coming out.
Can
So
I?
I can quit pulling weeds, huh?
Yeah, that's what I got, yeah.
As long as you got an animal that's willing to eat
The
or
thistle.
trot
Let
on
it
it.
go,
or
yeah,
do something.
really.
So I mean, I understand the concept of what we're doing. It's just to me, it's a very reductionist
Yeah.
idea of something,
Very interesting.
because you're just looking at it from a human-centric point of view. By, you know, like I've been thinking about, well, you know, when the cover crops, some of you probably have heard cover crops, and, you know, this is a big thing, and that's fine. But isn't a weed a cover crop?
Sure.
It's just how do you define it? And that's a human thing. And so I could say, well, just give me a whole bag of thistles and different things, and I'll plant that because I know it's going to grow, and then my cattle are going to eat it. So why do I care? But we have this idea that of this beautiful landscape, and that's what's okay, or that's right and that's wrong. My big thing is trying to get people out of that mindset, especially in a drier environment like here. Things are going to take a long time. We live in the Instagram society. We want it all now. It took 150 years from basically people moving from the East Coast across to destroy 50 million years worth of evolutionary grassland, and then you want it to come back in a couple years. And so think about the evolution of how we got here. Because you basically go back 560 million years ago, you just had rock. And how did we get soil? We went through getting plants, and then you got your animals. So you just had a hard mantle. I mean, you had ice and stuff that would move and crush stuff. But think about the evolution of how we've gotten to where we are. And so there's all kinds of ways you can look at it. I just look at it as like, how did it get here? And quit using our two big, huge frontal lobes to think that we're going to outsmart the whole idea.
She will beat you with a stick.
And the other thing is like Kim's on, I mean, mine's 300 acres, which isn't big, but on huge landscapes is where I focus thinking about how do we make more water. Because we already have plenty of photons, we have that every day. We have plenty of CO2. Actually, plants are starving right now. Even if, they talk about CO2 is a bad gas, but plants want more CO2, right? And so that's why you go in a greenhouse, they'll pump it to 1,000 or 1,200 CO2. So what we always lack, especially here, is H2O, right? And so how do we create more water? Then everything that we are trying to do, grow food and everything, will take care of itself. But you have to get the soil to be a sponge first and foremost. So I always come back to that, and that's why I say, whether it's the sheep or the goats or any of this stuff, it is just a pencil. It's just a tool. We got to have water. And then places that have a lot of water, they can get away with a lot of mistakes and still look good. They can get away with a lot of sins.
Many
But
of
here-
them will have infiltration
But
issues.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, definitely they do. I mean, you can go to places where I've, listen to farmers and stuff, they get 50 inches of rain and they want more.
They're irrigating.
And they're irrigating, right? And so I'm always thinking like, I don't want to worry about something I can't control, which is the sky. So what can I control on my property and go from there? And then just adapt, because that's all farming and ranching is adapting. If you get stuck in your paradigm of this is how we do it, yeah, you're gonna get in trouble.
And that weed that's on your property that you're thinking about pulling, well, I mean, in some circumstances, that's not the worst thing in the world, but if you're gonna pull it and there's just gonna be bare ground left, do not pull that weed. I see so many people that they won't attend their field, but once in a while they'll brush hog the weeds down. Don't do that. Do you know, if you're not cultivating something else or putting animal on the land or something like that, don't brush hog your field down to bare dirt for no other reason than you want to get rid of the weeds. You're not doing anybody any favors when you do that.
Good point.
Yeah, and back to the weed thing, you really have to understand the nutritional value of all of those weeds, because they are packed full of nutrition. Whether it's thistle or kosher weed or kelite or whatever you have, they all have a lot of nutrition. And again, for me with sheep and goats, if I put them on at the right time, if I have a little patch of thistle here and there, they take care of it. Does it come back? Yeah, because unless you're gonna spend weeks digging it out, but I've just left it. And, but you also have to understand that nutritional value. Because there was a time when, way back, where a lot of the area, especially when there was predominantly sheep around that Taos area, it was very transhumanic, where in the spring after lambs were born, they'd start moving their flocks from one ecological level to another based on legumes and forbs that were coming up, because they were really high in nutritional value. Once the grasses would come up, they'd move them to the next level, to the very top, graze, follow the dormancy of those again. But it was all based on, nutritional values and understanding that soil. But the nutritional value to that is also very key.
Yeah, real quick to that. You'd be surprised what animals will eat when you put them in a tight herd. They only, the calf only, or the lamb only learns what their mother knows.
That's right.
And so in vitro, they will actually start to learn in the womb if you have your cattle or whatever are eating all these other plants. They will eat and self-select. No, you don't want all alfalfa or all this. You want diversity, right? And these animals will go around and self-select and medicate themselves. And just like in nature, if that cow or whatever becomes sick, that's not one you want in your herd anyway. I mean, in nature, it would be taken care of, right? Through evolution. And so there's a great book called Nourishment about all of this. And I've taken cattle and got them off of the truck into a great, what you would think is amazing grassland paddock, and come right off, and there would be, I watched it, one big huge patch of thistles. They walked off of the truck and went straight to the thistle, and they ate every thistle first before they even touched all this beautiful grass that you had thought. And so that's just observation, context. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that I think we've been told that the land-grant universities and stuff, I think You gotta remember where land grant universities get their money. And so take that into consideration when you hear something like that, anything from, I just get very skeptical because they'll tell you this bull or this kind of cow is the best one, and no. All you care about is what works for your area. Whether it's pink and polka dotted, it doesn't matter. All you care about is what works for your area. So for here, I was thinking about this the other day, and the genetics have become different, but we have used Herefords and Angus, which were from England, or, wet area. But we brought them here to the west where it's, super dry. So we took something that's completely out of context and brought it over here. Now, it's been 100 years, doing these things and genetics, but you just think about it, it's like, well, wait, we brought this cow from a wet environment and brought it over here. Just like we brought, because most of it came from, England or whatever, when we came across the ocean, we used the methods of agriculture and brought it here and tried to use it in the West, and it just doesn't work. Context. And so we have to have massive machinery and all this other crap to make something grow. It's just like, it doesn't make sense. So I'm always thinking about the evolution of how we got here.
Humans don't always make sense.
Well, yeah. But we can critically think better, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we just have for one more question before lunch. Any questions brewing out there?
I have a question on the weed topic. So if we're thinking of a weed as like an opportunistic plant, that's maybe like the first secession from like a bare ground dirt property, what would be like some tools or techniques to promote or encourage like greater plant diversity from that?
Grazing. Grazing absolutely does everything for you, right?
Okay.
So if you've got enough vegetable matter of any kind on your plot, maybe you're gonna have to start with goats, right? Because they can eat just about anything. But if you come in and you hit it hard with goats, and then maybe if you have some ideas about what you want growing there, before they come, you might spread a bunch of seed out, as diverse as you can, or maybe you just want the native seed bank to come back, then maybe you would just mulch after they're done. But that's the thing, if you've already got something green, come in with goats. If you've got a bunch of stuff that you think are weeds or this and that, you can come with goats, then maybe sheep, you can kind of work your way through it. But all of these weeds are only there for their time, right? When you come with your backhoe and you dig a big trench, the first thing that's going to come is some thistle and some this and that, because it can do that. What it doesn't like is to be choked out by grasses. So it'll come and it'll be deep mining and doing all kinds of great things. Your neighbors might get pretty pissed because the thistle seed will go on their property, so you have to account for that. But at some point, they're going to have healed that land a little bit, and then other stuff will come in behind it, especially if you can have animal impact.
Patience. Patience. Patience is,
Yeah, and try not to manipulate nature, because I think that's what happens with larger corporate agriculture. They manipulate nature. You really can't. You just have to move with it, and it goes back to patience. What you get this year is what you get, and you just gotta move with it.
Yeah, because when we go out to my place, I probably have 40% less forage this year than probably the last 5 years. And it's had nothing's been grazed since last year. And it's just another interesting, why didn't it grow as much? Well, we had 0 snowfall this year, and up here at this elevation, I find that if we don't get a really good moisture start for these school season grasses, it just kind of then it gets hot, and then it shuts down. And so I've seen that this year. Now, everything is covered good, and it grew some, but it's just not if you were here last year, it would be totally a different look, but I don't care. I just know that you know, I mean, and then the other patience, and then grazing, but then also the recovery. We never really talked about it. We
Yeah.
talked about it out there, but the recovery is probably what has gotten us in the biggest trouble throughout the West. We always get into a pattern, well, this is where we go next, and then we go here, and this is just how we've done it. And I don't blame the previous ranchers or farmers, because they came into a system, you know, basically 150 years ago from the East Coast, and they came into a system that took 50 million years to get there. And so they had, you know, they couldn't probably foresee far enough that if we keep doing this, this took 50 million years to get here, but we're going to, in just a very, very short geological time, ruin this. And that's what happened, you know. Started with a moldboard plow to, you know, 60-foot plow. So.
That brings up another point, and I know we're about out of time, but you know, like on my operation, it's small. I didn't no-till. I mean, because you keep disturbing the soil, it keeps messing it up. I use the sheep and goats to do that. And if there's a place where I need to do something, I use a rake. I may have to rake a big piece, but it's, you know, it's a little gentler, but, you know, those are some of the other concepts too. 'Cause it
Yeah,
keeps
I
us
mean,
in-
there's nothing wrong with, if you're a really, you know, I don't agree with a whole lot of tilling, but you may have to.
Every now and then.
You may have to do something to do it. It's just not being the constant, you know.
If you've got that
Especially-
stem crested wheat, you might have to do something.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, men love to just get on a tractor. I mean, it's true. We just, for some reason, I don't, but I mean, I'm just saying.
I do.
That's what they like to do. You feel like you need to manipulate, like you've got to be doing something instead of stepping back and thinking about, you know, why is this here? Like we talked about the prairie dogs. I got tons of prairie dogs.
They're a pain in the ass.
But they are part of the ecosystem and they're a keystone species. The problem isn't the prairie dog. The problem is that as we get spread out as a society, we keep taking more and more
Yeah.
predators and more land from what they had, right? So it's not the prairie dog's not the problem. It's just that we have created the environment for them to you know.
Well, and they colonize.
And then they
Used to be
colonize,
all
right.
spread out.
Yeah,
That's one of the things we've seen with cover crop, is that if you can come in and get a good stand of rye in a prairie dog village, well, now all of a sudden the foxes can come in and hunt,
Exactly.
right? Now the prairie dog can't see way off in the distance and alert all
So
its
that's a
friends.
symptom versus
you
a root cause, okay?
Yeah.
You can go, oh, I'm gonna shoot them, I'm gonna poison them. That's, you're just looking at the symptom, and I'm gonna use this technological idea versus step back and go, well, wait, what is a prairie dog not like?
They don't, they want
They
to see.
don't,
they
they don't
need
like wet
distance.
ground. They don't like tall grasses or, you know, tall stuff. So if I get taller stuff, then I can get more wet ground. So that's what I'm saying when we think about symptoms versus root cause in any part of our lives.
And then with the mechanical part, you know, I was just thinking about this. Again, it goes to being really aware of little, you know, like my paddocks. I've got one that I'm probably gonna run a light disc over just because for whatever reason in this one little paddock, it gets really compacted and I haven't touched it in like 5 years. But what I've noticed, you know, what's coming up or not, it's, you know, and I run sheep through there, but for whatever reason, this one paddock gets really compacted. So a tiny light little disc that'll probably go in about that much just to open it up. And again, it's those things. The mechanical part is a tool also, but you have to know how to use it and when.
Just remember, every time you take a piece of equipment out, it's costing you money. It's costing you money, and usually it'll do a lot of damage.
If you're not elegant with what you're doing with it,
That's
you
what I'm
can do
saying.
you can do more harm than good.
Yeah.
But when you have a light touch, like she's talking about,
You have to know what you're doing.
and you take 5 years to make the decision, you probably thought about it enough, you're probably doing the right thing at that point.
It's a tool, but you have to know how to use it.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's you have a garden or whether you have 130,000 acres, you know, thinking about the context of where you're trying to go, think 10 years ahead. Don't think, oh, we'll get more moisture next year. So that's how we think, usually farmers and ranchers, oh, well, I'll get it next year. Or, God, I remember the 70s and 80s, we had all this snow, and I'm like, that makes no sense to even bring that up. What does that have to do with today and forward? You have to adapt, because, you know, that's why I say, thinking about the sky and moisture is, hope and pray is not a business plan.
Well, I'd like to bring up just grazing plans, which I think you all will go through. You know, we were very rigid in making grazing plans, but finding out what our stocking rate would be every year in the fall, and we still do that, and it's so critical. And you have to be so adaptive within that grazing plan, because, you know, if you just say that what you think you got, that you can go in, it's through observation. But what a big eye-opener for me, you know, 20 years ago was, you know, staying in these paddocks where you know you'd stay too long, 7 days, so you just start adapting that. But where people will keep their same, they've had 300 cows for 30 years and doing that, that's where you will get in huge trouble. Because we are, what people would think, we are so understocked at our headquarters Clay Place, but last year we were not. We only had 6 inches of rain. And the river bottoms and the farm area that now was being hayed is now all grazed, and it saved our neck. But then when these rains, we've had an incredible year. We've had over 18 inches of rain on most of the ranch, and to see these grasses just this tall now, and you'll go, I don't want to say any names, but you drive to Clayton where they're stockers, they've come in with the same number of cattle, the same number of year, and it's grown that much, and I know they've had 10 to 12 inches of rain. So you just need to really be conscientious of your stocking rates going into your next growing season.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that, because years ago over in Shama, we ran 3,000 head of sheep. And we had a sheep herder who had been sheep herding since he was 12. And we'd get to these areas, and Martine would be there smoking a cigarette, like, could barely see, cataracts, she was about 80 at the time. He'd say, we can only be here for 4 days. Because he understood that, you know, ratio of, what is it called in range terms, I forget. Anyways, but he understood that. And so 4 days, move the whole camp of 3,000 sheep to the next area. And he'd say, oh, we could be here a week. And then, you know, but it's about understanding all of those elements again. And with him, it was a lifetime of really not only knowing the sheep, but having really that experience of you know, shepherding his entire life and knowing what the vegetation could hold and what it couldn't. So yeah, that stocking rate thing is really, you know.
One thing about the stocking rate, I just wanted, as a friend of mine wrote this in a book, and I was reading it, which was a good example of a stocking rate. You have a water tank, and you have, you know, a paddock over here, but the animals have to go to this water tank. And so the example he used is, you can have the same stocking rate by taking 365 cows and going once to the water tank, or you can have one cow going 365 times, and you'll have, you know, you'll have a trail versus no trail. So that's the difference in stocking. People always ask me, well, what's your stocking rate? What's your, you know, your density? And it's basically observation and history of what you're doing. I walk my land all the time, and that way you see all the land all the time versus driving around, even just in a four-wheeler. Like, I understand I'm big, but the more you can walk in all types of things, even when it's pouring rain, go out there in your raincoat and see what's happening. You know, where's the water going? Hopefully it's not going anywhere because it's going straight in, because you have lots of plants, right? So that was just a thing about the stocking rate. if you can visualize, 365 trips or one trip.
Yeah, and it's like, as humans, we say 40% utilization of this thing or that. I know, cattle don't know that, but, like in our case with the sheep, the shepherd knew that, and it was based also on the types of grasses and forbs and legumes that were in that area, based on his experience, knowing that, okay, there's nutritional value here, the grasses aren't so big, but we can leave them here for this amount of time, based on that knowledge, and it wasn't based on, well, we could calculate 40% utilization,
Yeah.
which, cows, sheep don't understand that, And what does that do after you take a class in that? Nothing, But it's all those things we've talked about today.
Yeah, definitely. I think we gotta move on to lunch, but this is a great conversation to carry on into the tour later.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have about 20 minutes for lunch, and then we're gonna caravan over to Shawn's property. Flora looks like she has an announcement.
An important announcement. So this is our sign-in sheet. Might look like a simple piece of paper, but it's very important for these type of events for us. It helps us get some of the funds that pay for lunch, for example, or stipends to some of our speakers. So if every person could just take 10 seconds to write your name down in our sign-in sheet, it would mean a lot. Even if you're a panelist, you're still here learning today. So please go ahead and do that before you get some food.
Yeah. So thanks so much, everyone.